Welcome to another Mapbox Developer Spotlight video. I'm here with Mike Guida from RideReport. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Mike Guida. I work here at RideReport as a staff engineer. I've been working in software since around 2013 and mostly focused on front-end experiences, and worked a lot with JavaScript and more recently doing a lot of mapping. And so that's something I'm really excited about working here, is getting to work on maps and map visualizations here at RideReport.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about what RideReport is and what it does, and then also just give us a quick demo of how it works?
Yeah, so RideReport provides tools for cities to manage their micromobility programs. And so micromobility is, you see those e-bikes or e-scooters around town. The cities are managing those, trying to make sure they're deployed in the right areas, and operators are following the program policies that they lay out. So we do a few different things for the city. We work with the city to let them manage those programs and see where vehicles are in real time, implement policies and share those with operators, and then collect program fees. And then on the other side of the city department, we have planning. So we have tools for the city to understand where they should be putting new infrastructure in, or areas that they should look into that might be a safety concern. And they can look at trend data over time. And then finally, we let cities share that data out publicly. And so, there's a lot of value to cities to share this information in a way that others can use it for research and advocacy, and tell a story of micromobility in their city. So this is on a demo dashboard in RideReport, and this is our internal tools that were available to cities. And so you can just see an overview here of different metrics that we provide to the city to understand how a program is working. So some of those things are like the maximum number of vehicles that are available on a given day, maximum number of vehicles that are unavailable, how many trips are starting, trips per vehicle. These are things that give them a high level sense of like how their program operates, and some kind of like health metrics to show, a higher trips per vehicle is an indicator that a program is functioning very well in a city. We can look at some of the specific like mapping tools here. So this is our real-time view, and this is giving you insight as a compliance person at a city, what's going on right now. And so we can go back in time if there was a complaint that we need to look into, but assuming we're just looking at today and what's happening in the present, we could see all the different vehicles within the city here, and we can filter on different criteria. So something that's important to a lot of city officials is looking at this area and seeing they have these policies in place of there needs to be a minimum number of vehicles deployed, or there's a cap on how many vehicles can be in a certain area, and they could see the evaluation of that policy here. If we look in here, we can check out a particular vehicle, and so maybe there's a complaint with this vehicle, or we're curious like how this vehicle got to where it is, and we can see some status information about it, how that vehicle's doing, how it got here, when it was put here. And then we can also come and filter on these criteria. So we could say, maybe we want to just look at available vehicles right now. And we're looking at this particular region. And so there's different areas of interest in our system that cities care about. And so right now we're looking at on a demo map view, we're looking at a pilot area for this program. And we could say we instead want to look at this priority area within the city. And so if we just look at this priority area, we could filter vehicles down to here and see that there's 32 vehicles in this region. And this lets someone at a city understand like how vehicles are being deployed, where they're being deployed, how long have they been there. Sometimes we'll have a situation where someone complains that there's maybe too many vehicles in this one location. Operators are just dumping vehicles here. We can use a lot of tools to look at that. So we can come here and just count up these vehicles and see how they got here. And so this is like dropped off by a user. It wasn't deployed by an operator. We could also draw on the map here and say like, we got a lot of complaints in this boundary. And so we're going to look at just this specific area. And within this specific area, we could see how many vehicles there are, and maybe going back in time to see at a different point where there are a lot of vehicles here or not, and how did they get there.
I think I recognize the default styling for Mapbox GL Draw. Is that correct?
That is, yeah. We use a lot of different Mapbox styling defaults and plugins to help us do this. So that's been really beneficial to us. We focus on getting all this data here and presenting it in a useful way, but we don't have to build drawing tools, and we're excited about that. We'd rather just use what we can.
That's great. While you're in this demo, can I interject with a little question here? Is this is this live data that we're looking at, or is this all kind of like fictitious data for a demo?
This is fictitious data. I could show a live demo in a different view.
Not important. I was just curious, like the data feeds for this are there standards for this sort of thing, or if you guys want to operate in a city, do they have to like force the carriers to all operate in a certain way so that it's easier for you to consume, or is it just your job to consume all that data and normalize it and make sure it all can play well in the same system? How does that work?
Yeah, we pull in data from all the different operators that cities work with. So, a program's getting started in a city. Oftentimes, we'll start working with the city before that program launches and help them determine like what policies they should set up to run their program in the way they want. So, they usually have goals around deploying things like for different equity zones that they want to have specific metrics around. We'll help them get all that set up, and then the operators will start functioning in the city. And we serve as this third party like source of truth. So the operators send us data via the MDS spec, and that's the micromobility data specification, and that says like here's where a trip happened. Here's like criteria on how they're reporting that trip to us. There's information about all the different status changes. So you could think of that as like an event that happens to a vehicle. So a scooter is deployed by an operator as a specific status change, and then it gets reserved for a trip. And so we're pulling in all that data and making that queryable by the city and trying to present high level metrics. So the cities don't necessarily want to know like, here's all the GPS traces of all the routes, but they want to be able to say, there's a lot of usage on this street. And that's really important to understand. Is that a street that has protected bike lanes? Is it not? How does that correspond to other data?
Awesome. And it looks like in this case, we're seeing these green lines are bike lanes on this map.
Yeah, so we can see bike lanes here. We're actually just highlighting the styles from Mapbox pulled off of OpenStreetMaps here. So these bike lanes are bike lanes on the street.
But you can bring in whatever other data a city might be interested in seeing.
Yeah, so we have our own layers that we show you. A lot of people want to look at multi-use paths or bike lanes, and we're able to show that here. Depending on the city, they're wanting to visualize their own data as well alongside this. So, in this case, we could look at different bike share stations around town, and we could see where those line up. And so, in real-time view, this isn't as useful for a lot of people, but we can look at curb events, and this is showing where vehicles are dropped off at the end of a trip or where trips started. In this case, we're looking at where trips ended. And so we could see this visual of like the hotspots that trips are ending in the city. And this is demo data, but is a representative of what data might look like in a city. Mm-hmm. So if we look in here, we can see there's a lot of trips ending in this downtown area of Chicago, and we can overlay bike stations onto here. And we could see like where those bike stations line up with hotspots of trips ending. And this is something a lot of cities will come in here and do is they want to evaluate, we're going to put in 20 new stations around the city. What's the most impactful place to put that? And so you could see like certain hotspots that are further away from stations. Other times we'll look at stuff like bus stations. So a lot of cities care about seeing where bus stops are in conjunction with micromobility, and do people have access within a certain walking distance of those stations to get a rental bike? So I think something else we could talk about is we have this public dashboard here. And so this is our micromobility dashboard. This is public and anyone can view this, not just a city staffer. And so this is highlighting all the different programs that we work with around the world. And so we could look here at different cities and see these high-level metrics about them. So this is comparing Denver and Austin, but we could select any number of cities and see over time like how these programs are operating. So at a certain point, there's 8,850 trips per day in Denver, and how that compares to Austin or another comparable city. This is particularly interesting on a regional level. So here we're showing a overview of the country New Zealand. And so New Zealand has a lot of different cities with micromobility programs. And here's a high level overview of like what those programs look like as a whole, and then digging into each individual city. So you can see over time like how many trips per day are happening throughout the country, and how this has been impacted by COVID and has come back since then. Trips per vehicle per day is really interesting for a lot of cities. Again, this is a measure of like if a lot of vehicles are being used more than once throughout the day, that's showing a fairly healthy program. If we look at a specific dashboard, then we could start to look at this routes view and see where trips are occurring. So this is what's really helpful for planners when you're trying to understand like where there's existing bike infrastructure. If we're going to put new bike infrastructure in, what are the most heavily used streets? So in Wellington here, we can see if we zoom in, the street has a lot of traffic on it. There's been almost 115,000 trips since we've had micromobility in Wellington, and if we look at this in conjunction with bike lanes, we could see this area has a bike lane, but there's no bike infrastructure coming down here. And so this is something that a lot of cities are interested in, where they place new infrastructure.
This is great, and this is so these are beautiful and captivating, and these are all completely public. Like anyone can just come in and look at this wealth of data that you guys have helped to accumulate and visualize.
Yeah, this is all public, and you can actually download this data here and use it for your own visualizations as well. We do some bucketing here to really make sure we're on top of privacy concerns. So we're not showing you individual routes. We're showing you the number of trips that pass through a segment here, and only trips that there's been enough trips through the same segment to pass the threshold. So yeah, all this data is public. Anyone can come take a look at this and download it. We see a lot of universities and a lot of advocacy groups using this data for research. It's this really big question of like, where are people on bikes going? What are they doing? How do we understand like how bikes move around a city? And this is just shared programs that we're visualizing data for right now, but it's a proxy into that understanding of what do people on private bikes do as well.
Excellent. Yes. Beautiful. Really well done. Is that it for the demo, or is there more?
I think that's it. I can talk about a specific piece more if that's helpful.
No, if you mean like if it comes up later?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it for the demo.
Okay, cool. No, this is wonderful. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but if there's more, go ahead and do it. If not, like we can move into some like Q&A.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, why don't you unshare and we can just do some talking. If there's an opportunity that you like want to share something or show screen while we're talking, we can just stop and you can do that again. Because yeah, okay, so we'll just jump in. You showed us a lot of maps that are beautiful and data rich. How are maps useful for communicating information about micromobility in cities? Like, why do you need maps to get this for this site to be successful?
Yeah, we show a lot of different map data. It's usually the kind of natural way to understand route patterns in a city. We do have a lot of metrics that are just numerical analysis of here's how this program's operating, here's where vehicles are going, and that is interesting and useful, but it really comes together when you can look at it on a map and you can overlay different data sets together. So, all this is necessarily tied to the road infrastructure and the off-street path infrastructures that cities have, and being able to see that and people are going from point A to point B and how they're getting there is really important when you're making planning decisions.
Do you think do you think those maps are actually like more likely to be used when somebody's trying to make an argument to make a policy change in a way that a table wouldn't be?
Yeah, I think it tells a much more compelling story. So part of what we do is presenting this data for cities internally for compliance and planning, but the other part of it is helping cities tell their story of how they want to move transportation going forward, and how they want to make changes to improve it. And so as you make the case for more like protected bike lanes, it's one thing to say, we have X number of trips going through this street every day and try and make that case. But it's another thing to be able to visualize that and see, people are making choices about where they bike because of this. And we can see in some cities, there's streets that are next to each other that have better bike infrastructure, and how that usage changes over time. And And that's a really compelling story to tell via maps. So looking at those maps change over time and seeing the improvements make a difference. We've actually had a couple of cities that take this route data and go to their city council, and that's a way that they can they need the numbers to be able to show that this is a useful thing, but then they also need to tell that story to get funding to build more infrastructure. So we've seen in Denver that happened a couple of times, where in the Denver region there's a bunch of different cities that have these micromobility programs, and it's kind of the first view into bike data that they've had, and they've been able to use that to get more funding to build protected bike lanes, where in the past it's just been shared use of the road.
Awesome. That's got to feel good to take raw data and turn it into something that turns into turns very directly into something actionable that affects people's lives. So that's got to feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for myself and all of us here at RideReport, that's kind of the biggest win that we could have is getting more just being able to get more protected bike infrastructure built is something we all care about a lot, and being able to do that in a smart way and in an informed way. There's usually very limited resources dedicated to that, so if we could do it where we know there's high usage and high crash rates, then that's even better.
Are there any special design considerations that you have to put into making these kinds of maps, just based on the kind of data or the kind of audience, like use of colors and patterns or different data sets, things you need to take into account? Anything you want to share or talk about there?
Yeah, there's a lot of considerations, and it's usually really tricky for us to balance all of them. So we're considering things like accessibility, if you can understand the difference between these different color schemes, and if that's easy for you to see very quickly. We don't want people to have to like dig into all of this too much. It's nice to be able to glance at a map and have a high level understanding of what that's telling you. But then we also need to be able to dig into this deeper. So you might see this high level trend, and you want to overlay multiple data sets. It's a fairly tricky problem. I don't know if we've figured that out perfectly, but we need to be able to show the road network information. So what streets are these trips taking place on, and what intersections are we looking at? But we don't want that to overwhelm the user. We also want to show routes and bike lanes and off-street paths and all these things we can try and code in different ways via different colors or widths of lines and styling. So we make use of Mapbox's base styles to do that. There's pretty good defaults out of the box for simple maps that are not too much in your face of the base map, and then we can programmatically change all of our styling that we apply based on like how far you're zoomed in and what level of detail we want to show you. I mean, if you're zoomed out at a high level, we're really just trying to show an overview, and as you get more into it, we can be a little more specific with the visualization.
Were you a spatial developer before working on this particular project, or is this kind of new for you?
This is fairly new. Yeah, I've worked on simple mapping before, but we do quite a bit more now than I've done in the past.
All right, so that's a lead into the next question, which is: are there any spatial developer tricks and tools that you use often when you're building and maintaining RideReport? So the things that are not necessarily what's built into it, but like how you manipulate data, how you create data, how you edit things. Anything you want to share there?
Yeah, there's a few things I could speak to. One of the main things that we have to worry about is we pull in a lot of data from a lot of different companies, and usually the cities that are using our platform don't want to deal with any of the technical details. They just want to see like the same visualization, the same metrics across everyone. So we have to look for all these data anomalies and understand if we should be throwing this data out or requesting some clarification on what's happening. A lot of that's tricky to do when you're dealing with route data. So we just get GPS traces, and you have to decide programmatically if this is a high quality route trace or if it's not. One of the simplest things we could do there is just we'll visualize data if anything seems off. So a lot of route data is hard to understand on a numbers level, but if you look at it, it's very easy to pick out anomalies. And so that's a good starting point. We can't do that like in an automated way to all of our systems, but when we know something's going wrong, that's a really good way to understand what might be the issue. Something else that's really interesting is working with all this GPS data. We notice a lot of patterns in inaccuracies in GPS data. So we do a lot of things to detect if the GPS data seems accurate or not. And oftentimes when a GPS unit's starting up, like if there's a shared bike, the GPS isn't running all the time. It's running when you start a trip. And when that GPS unit starts up, it usually has a couple of points that it gives us that are, wildly off. They might be a mile away from the actual bike. So we're looking at that data and trying to understand, if you moved a mile on an e-bike in, 1 second and you went a mile, that's probably not quite an accurate point, but the rest of that route might be accurate. So something that we could start with there is just smoothing out route data. We're trying to match this data to road networks, and that lets us compare like on the same segment, multiple different data sets. And so if we smooth that data out, it often helps us bring that back like closer to the line that the person traveled. That's particularly important in cities and near large bodies of water. So we see GPS thrown off by like tall buildings, and you'll see a lot of zigzagging points there. And smoothing that out helps us match. And another area it gets thrown off is large bodies of water. So, when you have users going over bridges or riding near waterfronts, that's a time where GPS points could be like very far away from where they actually occurred. And GPS doesn't always we don't always get data on how accurate it thinks that point is. So we have to do that ourselves to understand, is this point in a realistic place from the last few points, or is it just totally far away and we need to just throw that away?
I think selfishly, I think you mentioned when we talked earlier that Geojson IO is actually part of your toolkit, and I was going to ask how you guys use it because I selfishly have been spending a lot of time improving it lately and getting it to use some of the latest stuff from Mapbox. So would love to hear how you guys make use of Geojson.io.
Yeah, thanks for supporting that. We actually send that to a lot of our customers and operators that we work with. So we have our own tools to understand this data internally, and we share some of that with operators. But it's really helpful for people who come from the GIS world and are maybe less familiar with GeoJSON. So all of our systems run on GeoJSON. We can convert things from ArcGIS into GeoJSON. But it's really helpful for people who aren't as familiar with GeoJSON to understand what that looks like, so they can visualize that data before they send it to us, and then they can also validate that it's accurate. I think GeoJSON, if you're not familiar with it, has a few different types that you have to keep track of, and that format is easier to explain via just sending someone a link to a website that can visualize that for them and validate it.
So final question is, why Mapbox? How do our tools and services help you build a better product with RideReport?
Yeah, the main reason we use Mapbox is it lets us focus on everything else that we care about. So, we're a pretty small engineering team, and we have to maintain a lot of different mapping features for our customers, and we want to focus on making sure that data is correct, and making sure that data is accurate and can be sliced in different ways and queried. All of that takes a lot of our time, and we want to visualize this in a nice way that's performant, but we don't want to go build our own mapping system. So one of the things that's really helpful for us is Mapbox is really fast. We can use this on we can have the same user experience across all of our platforms, and those maps are loading quickly. We're often putting hundreds of thousands of points or hundreds of thousands of street segments and loading that into the map at once. And as a user, that appears very quickly. There's not much of a delay in loading large data sets. Another thing that's been really good for us is there's a lot of good defaults that Mapbox provides out of the box. So when we first got started, we just set up Mapbox and threw some data on there, and that was our initial version, and everything looked pretty good to start. As we've worked on tooling over time, we've tweaked some of that. So we do a lot of programmatic styling based on your zoom level and what data you're looking at. But we don't have to go through and customize every little thing. We could just lean on the defaults, and then as we need, we can make those programmatic styling changes.
All right, Mike. Well, thanks so much for joining us for this developer spotlight. Really awesome to hear all the great things you're working on at RideReport, and would love to follow along and see what comes next for you guys. So thanks for coming on the spotlight today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and it was nice to have a chance to talk about RideReport and Mapbox. And feel free to check out our public dashboards and micromobility in your city.
All right. Thanks for watching. Take care.